discourse around the so-called gifted kids behaves on the internet in a very strange way. It's always happening in some deep, dark corner of TikTok. It pops to the surface of the mainstream every handful of months, it trends for like 12 hours and then it goes back into oblivion. And when this happens, there's always a question in the air.
What percent of children growing up are told that they are in some way gifted? It seems like it may be like 95% of you. How many of you were told that you were little gifted geniuses? That's fucking crazy. When I was growing up, people weren't like, oh, Simple Henry coming into the room. Oh, Simple Henry.
As Simple Henry eloquently and succinctly explains in his video, banger as always, he never misses, how does he do it, I'm a fan, it is kind of strange. The label gifted is supposed to represent an elite of students. It's supposed to be a rare phenomenon, or at least we think of it this way, so how come every fucking person on the internet seems to be a, quote, former gifted child? By the way, Little Joel's video is meant to obviously be a joke, and I would argue that the butt of that joke is not even the imaginary gifted kid that feels like a genius after one small success, but rather the adults around that imaginary kid who don't adjust their expectations as the kid grows up. Please be normal, okay? Do not comment on Little Joel's video. He is obviously just joking around, and no normal person would get offended at this video. Please be normal, okay? However, I would argue that, Henry's lighthearted tone and joking around is the exception and not the rule when it comes to this type of discourse. Because the question, hey, how come everyone is a gifted kid all of a sudden, is usually posed with condescension, frankly. The implication being that the person describing themselves as a former gifted child is just not that gifted to begin with. It's usually like, you were slightly faster than average at multiplications in elementary school. That does not make you special, or something along those lines. And fair, I've spent most of my latest zine hammering home the point that being smart and or gifted is actually not that special, and that we should let go of this identity of formerly gifted if we want to grow. We shouldn't root our self-esteem in being better than others. That's kind of a shitty thing to do to our fellow humans. So fair, I'll kind of take the L here. But it's also objectively weird the way some of you people talk about giftedness. Because for starters, being gifted is just numerically not that rare. There isn't really a uniform definition of giftedness, but most of the cases, we seem to consider a child with an estimated IQ of at least 2 standard deviations higher than the average to be gifted. By definition, that's 2% of the population, meaning 1 child every 50. That's a child every other classroom, it's not that rare. There's several gifted children in every school and dozens of hundreds of them in every major city. It's just numerically not that rare again. I don't think any of the former gifted kids online are trying to make the argument that their adult self is special or unique, because it literally is not. Another thing that confuses me about this discourse is that literally every single TikTok or tweet from one of these former gifted kids starts with something along the lines of, is any other former gifted child blah blah blah, or am I the only one who was placed in the gifted kid program and then blah blah blah. Like, these people are signaling in the most obvious and blatant way possible in the first 10 seconds of this media that they are making a piece of media for other former gifted kids. They're not trying to brag. They're definitely not trying to make anyone feel inferior or ashamed. Rather, it seems to me like what they're trying to do is find other people like them. This seems very obvious to me. It's in the first 10 seconds of most of these TikToks. And sometimes these kind of TikToks are met with flat out vitriol. The former gifted kid who makes it their whole identity is at this point a recurring laughing stock on Twitter and TikTok. Most of the time that I see this kind of behavior is really just inventing a guy to get pissed at, and I don't fucking understand why. Because gifted children are, technically speaking, special needs children, right? We don't think of them that way, but they are, meaning that the education system is kind of not built for them, because, very rightfully so, the education system is built to accommodate the average kid, which, by the way, is a good thing. And, in Italy, we don't really have gifted kids programs, so I'm very out of my field here. But from the anecdotal evidence, it seems like a lot of gifted kids programs also don't address all of the special needs that gifted kids have. For example, there seems to be little psychological support for handling the stress of a more challenging curriculum. Many gifted kids are prohibitively expensive, which furthers the class divide, and also importantly, completely leaves behind working class children who just happen to be gifted. Also, giftedness can mask a whole array of mental health problems, from autism to ADHD to depression, and there's little support for finding and handling any of them. And then there's those extreme cases of like kids who go to college as teenagers, kids who skip a lot of grades, kids who get homeschooled because of their giftedness, that kind of stuff. Teenagers who are constantly around adults are at high risk of grooming, isolation, chronic stress, and a whole array of other things. And most college programs don't have an efficient way of handling these cases. Some of you, I think, really don't understand how selfish and weird you sound when you make fun of former gifted kids. These people actually do have special needs and specific developmental challenges, and sometimes they have been genuinely failed by the adults around them. What's funny about that? Like, walk me through the joke, because apparently I'm not that smart to begin with, so I think I need explanations here. Cuntiness aside, let's go back to the original question and try to answer it earnestly. If being formerly gifted is inherently meant to be exclusionary, how come it's so relatable? How is it possible that everyone and their dog seems to have gone through a gifted kid burnout? Because that is what former gifted kids on the internet are mostly complaining about, right? The "I used to be so good at school and so curious what happened to me" phase of your life. Well, if I may, I have a theory. It's admittedly from anecdotal experience and anecdotal evidence from my own experience, the experience of my friends, the experience of acquaintances at uni, and the folks who shared their life story after I published my zine. So, like with everything you see on the internet, take what is useful and leave the rest. But here it goes. I think that the so-called gifted kid burnout is actually not about being gifted at all. I actually think that for every single person, there comes a time in which raw intellect is not enough to get the grades that they want anymore. Or more realistically, the grades that their parents expect from them. I actually think we all go through this. I call this period the fall-off. And it's the moment in one's academic career in which the effort, real or perceived, required to keep up with academic demands grows much faster than what someone is able to give. In this time, you can't rely on memory and intuition alone anymore, and you have to develop a system to study. It's just that some folks have this fall off in elementary school, and some folks have it in grad school. Those children that we label as gifted kids tend to have this later in life, and they usually have the problem that when it happens, not if, when, they haven't built skills like patience and endurance and grit, so their grades start to tank, and they are very confused and ashamed and don't understand why. But honestly, I don't think the fall-off is less painful for those who go through it in middle school rather than college. I think it's challenging no matter what. I think of the fall-off as a sort of intellectual puberty. We all go through it, and the vast majority of us make it out of it well and alive and with zero self-esteem issues. But it's also very important that the people around us, especially the adults around us, coach us through it and are there for us. I think it's an important step in the life of a young person, like the first heartbreak or the first menstruation. It's a moment of profound changes in our values, and it needs to be taken seriously, no matter the age at which it happens. For most people, it's relatively brief and smooth, but it can also last months, if not years. The fall-off is relatable to a lot of people not because they are all claiming to be really smart, or because they fail to realize that being slightly faster at multiplications in elementary school is useless as an adult. Like, they don't need to be humbled. Rather, this is because they related to the experience of not living up to their parents' and society's expectations. And sometimes, I'll admit it, they misplace that blame on the label of gifted. I'm not an expert, I can't tell you what to do with your life, I'm just a stranger on the internet, blah blah blah. But if it has been years since the last time you were getting excellent grades, and this is still a source of pain for you, that's probably a pretty good sign that the fall-off was not very smooth and not very healthy for you. During the fall-off, we find out whether or not the people around us appreciate us for who we are, rather than just for what we can do. After I published my zine, and quite a few people bought it, way more than I expected, thank you so much, I started receiving a lot of emails from people who actually had average grades in middle school and high school, but still very much related to the experience of being formerly gifted. If you wonder how that's possible, and low-key I did too, I think it's because it's actually not about being gifted at all. Rather, it's about what happens when we stop being gifted. In other words, I think the fundamental question of the fall-off is, am I still gonna be loved now that I'm not special anymore? Let's talk about expectations for a second. The difference between we just want the best for you and we always expect the best from you is surprisingly thin. And kids are not that great at telling the difference a lot of the time. The adults around us sometimes like to dream big for us because they're trying to show us that they believe in our capacities. But if a child internalizes these expectations, it can become tricky to have a healthy self-esteem. It's not uncommon for someone who was the best of their class in middle school, which, allow me to remind you, happens to one child every 20 to 30 people, to be told repeatedly that they're gonna achieve something incredible one day, you know? And achieving something incredible, I would argue, is much more rare. Like, it happens to a handful of people in a generation. Most of the time, by the way, these jokes are completely harmless. I'm obviously not trying to suggest that we collectively stop believing in children, but the fall-off is kind of the moment in which we become average. And if the fall-off was not smooth and healthy for you, maybe growing up you felt like becoming average was seen as a failure in your family and would have been punished or shamed. And I think that that is the experience that people relate to. It's not about being gifted, it's not about feeling like you're smarter than everyone else, it's about feeling like you disappointed your parents, let's be real. I want to make a side note here, because sometimes folks see the struggles that children and teenagers and even adults in grad school go through during the fall-off, and they use these challenges as an argument for why school should be simpler, tests should be less demanding, less homework should be assigned, and so on. I disagree with this idea very strongly. I don't think school should be made easier, because I think there is incredible value in doing something challenging, even if that thing is difficult and stressful. But I also think that the school system, and also a lot of families, do a terrible job at recognizing that doing well in school requires a lot more than just studying or just being smart. In my opinion, students are not nearly as emotionally supported as they should be. And that is not really because they have like evil people around them, but because the adults around them, you know, parents and teachers, are too overworked, underpaid, overwhelmed, unequipped in general to handle the situation. Childhood is obviously a psychologically delicate time. Puberty is weird and overwhelming. Being a teenager is fucking exhausting. Young people are always going through a lot, they just kind of are. So intellectual skills are not the only skills necessary to get ahead in life. And grades are not a good way to assess if someone is doing well in life. It's wrong to assume that all they will need for success is determination and motivation. So I'm not in favor of lowering the bar, but I do demand the support necessary to reach it. All right, let's go back to the fall-off. The probably most famous book about the topic of gifted kids is The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. I did not like this book at all. I think it misses the mark by a long shot. I have a whole paragraph about this in my zine, but I want to repeat it in my video too. I really do not recommend reading this book. Basically, the thesis of the book is that when children are highly intelligent and gifted, they are more in tune with their parents' feelings and desires and expectations. And so they are more likely to internalize those expectations. This sounds plausible at a first glance, but in reality it doesn't make much sense. Because one, there's plenty of people who are smart and do not feel like they disappointed their parents, and two, there are plenty of people who received very conditional love from their parents and are also just not that smart, which is fine and normal, literally, that's just normal. So how much the fall-off impacts you emotionally and your IQ, like, these are way more disconnected than people think. I'm going a bit off vibes here, but it's almost as if this book was saying, of course you're in so much pain, it's because you were so intelligent growing up. And like, that's a really flattering narrative, but it kind of implies that if you stop being in pain, then it means you were not that smart to begin with. You know what I mean? It means that your intelligence is measured by how much pain you went through, and I think that's a very unproductive way of thinking about it, you know? So yeah, I kind of hated this book, but I will borrow a metaphor from it, because that one metaphor is really good. The fall-off is the period in which we realize that for all of our lives, we've actually been walking on metaphorical stilts this whole time. And yes, it is exhilarating to always being 15 centimeters taller than everyone else, but we're also suddenly aware that we can never relax, that we're always one wrong step away from breaking our neck. We feel at the same time grandiose, you know, special and superior to everyone else, but also we're secretly envious of those who can simply walk, who get to not think about it that much. This is an anxious and unstable situation, but it's difficult to let it go because there's an ego boost to being the tallest one and commanding so much attention from it. We want to feel and be special, but being special is really stressful, and that stress is taking a toll on us. And during the fall-off, we developed this idea that if we only managed to stay perfect, to master the stilts, everything would be okay. And in order to get to the other side of the fall-off, in order to actually grow and spiritually mature from it, We have to let go of that illusion. In the initial phase of the fall-off, we usually just seek help to stay on the stilts. We ask for help to study more efficiently or get less distracted. Obviously, I'm not opposed to these things. It's actually part of the support that I think we should give students, the one I was talking about before. And also, at some point in life, you do have to learn how to study. That's just a part of life, I'm sorry. I'm just saying that if we have tried countless study hacks and focusing tricks and they haven't added up to much progress, if we keep telling ourselves, oh, I just need to get back on track, or I just need to be less lazy, or I'll just study more next time, you know? If we keep telling ourselves this for months and months and years, let's say maybe there is something more going on here. Maybe there's a deeper transformation waiting for us on the other side, something for us that is more profound than a better grade and staying at the top of the class. Maybe these expectations are not really serving us. Maybe they aren't even ours. So, how do we get ourselves to the other side of the fall-off? Well, if there ever was a culture that mastered the art of disappointing your parents and societal expectations and thriving in spite of it, I would argue that's the LGBT community. So let me turn to the elder queers for guidance. In particular, Jack Halberstein points out in his essay, The Queer Art of Failure, that for queer people, the quote-unquote normal life is often out of reach.
Lesbian is irrevocably tied to failure in all kinds of ways. Indeed, according to Heather Love, same-sex desire is marked by a long history of association with failure, impossibility, and loss. Homosexuality and homosexuals serve as scapegoats for the failures and impossibilities of desire itself.
You know, straight marriage, kids, a dog, a picket fence, that kind of stuff is usually out of reach for us because that kind of life would require us to spend most of our life feeling like we're walking on stilts. Queer people have to mourn their heterosexual self. They have to throw a little funeral for the straight version of them, who, compared to them, probably had an easier life and more external approval and disappointed their parents less. But in exchange for this little funeral, we finally get stability and authenticity. Once we're done thinking that we'll never have a quote normal future, we can build whatever future we want. And most importantly, we can start having fun. The key to getting out of the fall-off is fun. We need to incorporate in our life as many fun things as we can, as many things that get done just for the sake of it. And I'm warning you right away that that is not gonna be easy at all. I remember finding it very, very difficult to just enjoy my passions in the beginning of my fall-off. I kept falling into this pattern of thinking that everything I started had to be my life calling, right? Otherwise, I was just wasting my time. I felt like I needed to be going somewhere to even justify my existence. But then I realized that I'm not really going anywhere in life, because I am already exactly where I need to be. It's bizarre, isn't it? A lot of us are worried that we're gonna waste our gift. That's not how gifts work. All right, that was the video. Thank you so much for watching. The paper version of Gifted and Other Lies is now available. You can get it on my website, costanzablastri.com. The digital version is $2.99 USD and the paper version is $11.99 plus shipping. If you want more of my writing, I post 1 to 2 extra essays on Patreon and Substacks. The links for all those are gonna be in the description. There is also a lot of free essays, so check them all out at the links in the description. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you very soon. I'm back to YouTube, baby. Let's go.